I have been a romantic since birth. I grew up listening to my parents tell over and over again the stories about how they first met. And yet, despite my own romantic origin story, I used to be so embarrassed by my interest in romantic love that I would write about it in diaries that I would lock and then wrap in duct tape. And then all the books about the subject, I would hide under my bed, as if researching it would make me less smart somehow. I know that high school relationships are generally more short-lived, and so sometimes people think they're trivial, but I think they're neither trivial nor insignificant. When John Steinbeck's son wrote him from boarding school telling his father that he was afraid he had fallen in love, Steinbeck wrote back and said, "First, if you are in love, that's a good thing. That's about the best thing that can happen to anybody. Don't let anyone make light or small of it for you." Tonight, I'm going to structure my talk in a way that I would never do around the Harkness table in my English classrooms. First, I'm going to give you explicitly the lessons I want you to take away. Yeah. Then I'm going to tell you the story, and then I'm going to end with guiding questions. So here are the 3 lessons without context. If your date's awkward, take their hands and place them around your neck. Number 2, if your friend's crying in a stairwell, please tell them you'll take Air Force One to see them. And number 3, live as if you're graduating in 4 days. So I'll start with the stories. Story number 1. I flew 10,000 kilometers from my home in the Middle East to attend boarding school in the United States. But that move was less daunting, truly was, less scary than asking him to Sadie Hawkins. Sadie Hawkins was the traditional fall dance at my high school in which the girl asks the guy. I know that now such a dance would be considered really heteronormative and incredibly retrograde, but almost 30 years ago, that kind of dance was actually quite extraordinary and empowering, and I was terrified. I met him at a new student event. Now picture the most beautiful person you've ever seen in a movie. Got that? Now imagine he stepped out of the movie and decided to attend your high school. That was the guy that I wanted to ask to the dance. At night, during the first few months of the fall semester, he, who was from Spain, would knock on my first floor dorm window and invite me to go out into the soccer fields with him. And I swear, all we did was talk. He would encourage me to practice Spanish with him. I was in Spanish 1. And now that I'm older, I just recognize how boring that must have been for him, who was actually native speaker of Spanish. Despite our friendship, I was still so scared to ask him that I waited until the drop-dead deadline to ask him to the dance. It was so late that the dress that I wore to the dance, I couldn't even dance in. I had to wear the dress that I wore to the National Junior Honor Society induction a year earlier. At the dance, Boyz II Men started playing. I'll make love to you. And I watched as couples started pairing up. And I leaned next to one and said, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. And he took my awkward hands, positioned them at the base of his neck, and said, don't worry, it's easy. He was only 14. And I had such a good time at that dance, and it was because of him and his grace. Story number 2. My first kiss was the best writer at the school. He was handsome and smart, all that and a bag of chips. But the first thing that I noticed about him was his effective use of semicolons in the student newspaper. Yes, thank you. To be clear, he was not my boyfriend. He was actually a really good friend of mine. But sometimes you crush really hard on your friends, and your other friends have to listen to play-by-plays of almost every encounter you've had with him. After we kissed, I was so giddy the next morning that I lost track of the number of times I sprayed myself with the now discontinued Bath & Body Works scent, Peach Nectar. I was glowing when he sat next to me at breakfast and he said, "Kristine, you smell so good. You remind me of a honey glazed ham." And he meant it as a compliment. He was right, by the way, I did. 11 days before he graduated should have been one of the happier nights of my junior year. I had been chosen for one of the student leadership positions. I should have been out celebrating with my friends, but instead, I was in a stairwell weeping into my hands. According to a diary entry, May 26, 1996, this is the reason I was crying. I told him, "You're going to be president of the United States in 2016, and I'm going to be president of the Philippines." I thought we'd never see each other again. And he said, "I'll take Air Force One to see you." You're probably wondering how the story ends. As it turns out, the fact that neither of us went into politics obviated the fact of needing state dinners or Air Force One. However, we did take a commercial flight to fly halfway across the country to attend each other's weddings. Every year, we sent each other holiday cards, and after each of my 2 daughters were born, he sent me copies of his son's favorite books. And 3 years ago, when my dad passed away suddenly in Manila, his memorial service was held over Zoom. I was waiting to give my father's eulogy when I scanned the Zoom participant list, and his name was there, as I hoped it would be, even though it was only 6 a.m. his time. Story number 3. I knew him for only 4 days. I'd finished my freshman year of college, and I came back to my boarding school to see my sister in the Spring U musical. I don't actually remember being introduced to him, but whatever it was, it must have been brief. For those of you who are around my age, you remember something called AIM? Yes. For those of you much older or younger than I, think of it as the grandparent of texting. So one night I was online when our mutual friend typed and said, "Kristine, he thinks you're a fit bird." I didn't know that bird was British slang for woman, so I texted back, "Tell your friend I think he's a fit bird too." And that was the beginning of about 21 plus hours of IMing. And we would stay up until the geese started squawking, go to bed, wake up for lunch, and repeat the next day. I don't actually remember what we talked about in those hours of IMing each other. I know that he introduced me to E.M. Forster, whose work I hadn't read except for his most famous line, "Only connect." I don't remember sometimes what he looked like because I don't have pictures with him. I know only that that was the first time I stayed up all night for a boy, the closest that I'd felt to almost anybody, and we weren't even in the same room. The night before he graduated, we were standing on the lawn between the student center and a dorm. Our dean of students was ringing a cowbell telling us that it was time for curfew. I remember how I felt that night, I remember I felt so beautiful and so stomach sad. And I looked up at him, who was so serious. So I thought I'd lighten the mood, and I said, "My lips are so dry, they'd probably stick to yours." And he didn't laugh. His eyebrows were furrowed into an upside-down V, and he took my hand as if to shake it, but instead, he pulled me in and he kissed me. Neuroscientists and sociologists will tell you why these moments matter. A quick Google search will bring up terms like social contagion, dopamine, neural imprints, and neuron pathways. And I think that thinking about love and desire as physiological and sociological responses is fascinating. But I can't speak to any of that. What I can do is read my own stories as text. Aside from having a pretty good memory and friends who will corroborate my stories, I also have every diary I've ever kept. And in my closet are hat boxes of letters, artifacts from a lifetime that seems time zones away from me. If you ask the high school version of me whether I'd fallen in love with any of these men or whether it were just hormones, she would think your question dull and crass. Because the truth is, I didn't fall in love with any of them. I've never liked that metaphor. It makes me think that I'm walking in the dark room, I trip over a box, fall into a hole, and bleh, I'm in love. But as I recall, I was smart and strong and clear-eyed. I didn't fall in love. I was closer to what poet Julia Copas said love was, that it rises in us like certain music does. That's like spilt tea that inches up, cube-like gaps in a cube of sugar lying by a cup. It's amazing. When I think about what these experiences meant, they quadruple the size of my campus, because I suddenly had the sense that I had this colorful public life and also this private, intimate life that colored the public. So 6:30 a.m. breakfast was as romantic as a moonlit sky, and a school-sponsored dance in a dining hall almost literally opened up an entirely new country for me. I even became a better student. Math class has historically been a struggle for me, but when my math teacher talked about asymptotes, I would feel such pangs, because they get infinitely close to the line without touching. I know, so many feelings. And I was 15 when I discovered Edna St. Vincent Millay's poetry for the first time. And in her poem Hyacinths, she compares the gnawing at her heart to the gnawing of the teeth of field mice at hyacinth bulbs. And for the first time, I felt this burst of literary joy and compassion that I've been chasing since. If you asked any of these men about me, I'm sure they'll tell you different stories. And that's normal. After all, we remember and forget different things. I don't know if almost 30 years later, I'm as central to their memories as they so clearly continue to be in mind. Maybe I'm the protagonist, or maybe I'm some character who has floated into the periphery, a person that they used to know. And that's part of the risk and promise of being vulnerable to what poet Julia Copas calls, not Julia Copas, Joanne Salter calls the brutishness of time. But I do know that if you ask them about me, they would tell you that it was clear how deeply I cared. I used to hide these feelings in locked diaries, but I haven't for a long time. And I credit so much of that to my earliest experiences. I told you I'd give you guidance questions. Here they are. Almost every day, I ask myself 3 questions. Number 1, what is truly worth staying up for? Number 2, how do we pay attention? Like really pay attention to the people and the landscapes that surround us. And number 3, how must we behave? So if this were the last time we would be together, we would remember each other with aching tenderness. Because the truth is, it all ends somehow, some way. My high school roommate and I used to listen to Delilah love songs at night. And because of our playlist, I used to think that heartbreak happened only when love was unrequited or after a breakup. But I now know that's not true. Heartbreak is the natural result of loving anyone or anything. We don't always get the chance to go back in time to tell the people who made us better that we're so grateful that our lives intersected, however briefly or long. I've sort of made it my own mission over the last several years to do exactly that. Sometimes the response is an immediate phone call asking me if I'm okay. And I get that, because getting an email with unfiltered gratitude on a random Tuesday is a little weird. Sometimes, though, I'll get a response saying, "Thank you for your email. I remember that night so clearly, and I hope my children get an email like this someday." But the best is when my reaching out means that I have a reunion with somebody that I've missed for more than 20 years, and suddenly they're sitting in my living room in Milton. And for a weekend, we have temporarily closed the gap of what writer Michael Ndage calls the sadness of geography. It all goes so fast, and there is never enough time. At 44, I understand what Jennifer Egan meant when she wrote, "Time's a goon, the goon has won," in a way that I never would have when I was 18. My own life has delighted and surprised and broken me in ways that my 18-year-old self would never have understood. And I'm so glad she couldn't imagine it. But what I'm telling you is that these stories, my texts, have sustained me in the same way that my favorite books have, amplifying my joys and quelling my quietest anguish. There is no way to tell somebody slicing cheese for me at the deli counter why honey-baked hunks of meat move me so. But there's also no way to know that on my quietest nights, in my emptiest moments, what has brought me comfort and solace is a memory of a young man standing under a lamplight, or the image of my walking into the middle of my dorm common room and seeing the boy of my 9th grade dreams holding a corsage in his nervous hands. Maraming salamat po.